There are moments that divide a life into before and after. For her, it came in the silence between heartbeats standing in the doorway of her bedroom, ultrasound photos still warm in her hand, watching her husband entwined with another woman on sheets she had chosen, the perfect life she had built, the child growing inside her, all suddenly revealed as elaborate props in someone else's performance. They didn't stop when they saw her. They didn't even look ashamed. "You're home early," he said, as if she were the one who had transgressed. Some betrayals cut so deep they transcend pain, becoming something else entirely: clarity. Cold, merciless clarity. In that crystalline moment, as tears refused to fall and her unborn child kicked against her ribs, she made a silent vow that would reshape destinies. One empire would fall, another would rise from its ashes. And the man who thought he could discard her would learn that some women aren't merely broken by betrayal, they are forged by it. The soft hum of a Bentley's engine died as Mintam pulled into the circular driveway of her luxurious villa in Saigon's most exclusive neighborhood. The residence, spanning over 1,000 square meters with its own swimming pool, gym, and private cinema, stood as a monument to the success of her husband, Huang Kai, the billionaire real estate mogul behind Kai Group. Tam gathered her medical files from the passenger seat, a smile playing on her lips. Her 6-month ultrasound had confirmed what she already felt in her heart: their baby boy was developing perfectly. She couldn't wait to share the news with Kai. Perhaps tonight they could finally settle on a name for their first child. As she stepped out of the car, the security guard nodded respectfully. "Good evening, Mrs. Huang. You're home early today." "Yes, Tai. I have wonderful news for my husband," she replied, her hand instinctively resting on her rounded belly. The guard's eyes flickered momentarily, a reaction so brief Tam almost missed it. "Mr. Huang arrived about an hour ago. I believe he's upstairs." Something in his tone gave her pause, but she dismissed it. The pregnancy had made her more sensitive lately. Another thing the doctor had mentioned during her appointment: the marble foyer gleamed under the crystal chandelier as Tam entered the house. She called out to their housekeeper, but received no answer. Strange. Mrs. Lin was usually preparing dinner at this hour. The first floor stood eerily quiet. Kai's briefcase sat on the console table. He was definitely home. Yet there was no sign of him in his usual spots, the home office or the living room bar, where he typically unwound after work. Tam ascended the grand staircase. Her Harvard-educated mind, once the financial director at a major corporation, before marrying Kai, piecing together subtle inconsistencies. Kai's recent late nights at the office, his emotional distance, the way his new personal assistant, Ngoc Diep, looked at Tam with barely concealed contempt during company functions. As she reached the second floor, a sound stopped her cold, a feminine giggle, followed by Kai's low murmur. It came from their bedroom. Time seemed to slow as Tam approached the partially open door. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. A part of her wanted to turn away, to preserve the perfect life she thought she had, to protect the child growing within her from what she might discover. But another part, the Harvard graduate who had excelled in a cutthroat financial world before becoming Kai's wife, pushed her forward. She pushed the door open. The scene burned itself into her memory with merciless clarity. Kai and Diep entwined on the bed, her marriage bed. Diep's slender legs wrapped around Kai's waist, her expensive designer dress discarded on the floor. Kai's back to the door, his attention fully captured by the younger woman beneath him. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Diep's eyes, cat-like and calculating, flicked over Kai's shoulder and met Tam's. Instead of embarrassment, Tam saw triumph in that gaze. "Kai," Diep purred. "I believe we have company." Kai turned, and Tam expected to see shock, perhaps guilt on her husband's face. Instead, his expression hardened into something cold and unfamiliar. "You're home early." His voice was flat, devoid of the warmth it once held for her. Tam stood frozen, one hand clutching the ultrasound images, the other protectively covering her belly. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "In our home, in our bed." Kai disentangled himself from Diep. reaching for his discarded shirt with unhurried movements. I was planning to have this conversation after the baby was born, but perhaps this is better. He buttoned his shirt methodically. I want a divorce. Tam. The words hit her like physical blows. Deep made no attempt to cover herself, instead stretching languidly like a satisfied cat before pulling the sheet up to her chest, a mocking gesture of modesty that came far too late. How long, Tam managed to ask, her Harvard-trained mind desperately trying to analyze the situation even as her heart shattered. Does it matter? Kai replied. 6 months, Deep interjected with a cruel smile. Since the day he hired me, the same time you got pregnant, I believe. Unfortunate timing. Tam staggered backward, the implications crashing down on her. 6 months, the entire duration of her pregnancy, while she'd been creating life. Kai had been betraying her. I've already prepared the divorce papers, Kai continued, his voice businesslike as if discussing a corporate merger rather than the dissolution of their 5-year marriage. You'll receive a generous settlement, provided you leave quietly. He paused. Tonight? Tonight, Tam repeated incredulously. You're throwing me out. I'm carrying your child. Something ugly flashed across Kai's face. A child I never particularly wanted. Deep laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Oh, honey, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Did you really think getting pregnant would keep him? Men like Kai need women who can maintain their figure and their ambition, not domestic broodmares? Tears blurred Tam's vision, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of these people. She backed toward the door, her mind racing. Everything she owned was in this house. Her entire life for the past 5 years had been built around Kai and his empire. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, hating the vulnerability in her voice. Kai shrugged. A hotel. For now. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow with the details of the settlement. His tone softened marginally. Be reasonable. Tam, take the money and disappear from my life. It's better for everyone. Everyone, Tam repeated, her shock giving way to anger. Better for whom? Kai, for you and your mistress. What about your son? I'll provide financially, he replied dismissively. But I have no interest in playing father. Deep and I have our own plans for the future. Deep's smile widened as she pressed herself against Kai's back, her chin resting on his shoulder in a possessive gesture. We're thinking of starting our own family, she said, with children that are actually planned and wanted. The baby kicked then, a strong movement as if responding to the threat in Deep's words. The sensation grounded Tam, reminding her that regardless of what happened next, she wasn't truly alone. You have 1 hour to pack your essentials, Kai said, checking his watch. Security will escort you out afterward. And if I refuse, Tam asked, her voice steadier now. Kai's expression hardened. Don't make this ugly, Tam. I have evidence that could ruin your reputation, fabricated, of course, but convincing, infidelity, embezzlement. It would be your word against mine, and we both know whose story people will believe. He gestured around them, at the mansion that represented his power and influence. Don't force my hand. In that moment, Tam saw her husband, truly saw him for perhaps the first time. The handsome face that had once made her heart race now appeared mask-like, concealing something cold and reptilian beneath. Had it always been there? Had she been so blinded by love and ambition that she'd married a monster without recognizing him? Fine, she said quietly. I'll go. As she turned to leave, Deep called after her. Don't forget to return those designer bags he bought you. They'd look much better in my closet. Tam shut the door on their laughter. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, one hand pressed to her mouth to stifle her sobs, the other cradling her belly. The baby kicked again, stronger this time. It's okay, she whispered to her unborn son. Mama's got you. We'll be okay. She had 1 hour to pack the remnants of her life, to figure out where to go, what to do. The future she'd planned had evaporated in an instant, replaced by a terrifying void of uncertainty. As she moved toward their shared walk-in closet to retrieve a suitcase, a realization struck her. She quickly pulled out her phone and activated the voice recording app, then silently returned to the bedroom door, positioning the device near the crack. Inside, Kai and Dieppe had resumed their conversation, unaware of her presence. "Do you think she'll fight the divorce?" Deepa asked. Kai's laugh was dismissive. "She's not stupid. She knows she can't win against me. No one can. What about the child? It could complicate things. I've already spoken with my lawyer. I'll provide the minimum required by law, but I want nothing to do with it. Once she signs the papers renouncing any claim to Kai Group, she and that baby will be out of our lives for good." Deep's voice dropped to a seductive purr. "I told you, didn't I get rid of that aging mare and let me give you a child truly worthy of your empire?" "You were right, as always," Kai replied. "I should have divorced her years ago." "Well, now you can marry me instead," Deep said triumphantly, "and together we'll build a dynasty." Tam backed away, her hands shaking as she stopped the recording. The naked cruelty in their voices made her physically ill, but the evidence might prove useful. She slipped the phone into her pocket and headed to the closet to pack. 45 minutes later, she had filled 2 suitcases with clothing, toiletries, and a few personal items. She deliberately left behind the jewelry and designer goods Kai had given her. Over the years, she wanted nothing that would remind her of him. The only exception was her laptop and external hard drive containing her personal and professional documents. As she was about to close the second suitcase, her eyes fell on a small safe hidden behind her winter coats. Kai had given her the combination when they first moved in, insisting she keep her important documents there. She hadn't opened it in months. On impulse, she dialed the combination and pulled open the door. Inside were her passport, birth certificate, marriage license, and a USB drive she didn't recognize. She pocketed everything, including the mysterious USB. A knock on the bedroom door startled her. "Mrs. Huang," it was the head of security. "Mr. Huang has instructed me to escort you out in 15 minutes. I'll be ready," she called back, her voice surprisingly steady. She closed the suitcases and took one final look around the room that had been her sanctuary for 5 years. On the bedside table sat a framed photo of her and Kai on their honeymoon in Paris. She picked it up, studying Kai's smile. Had he ever truly loved her, or had she simply been a convenient accessory? A trophy wife with the right credentials to enhance his image, with sudden resolve. She placed the photo face down and wheeled her suitcases to the door. The security chief was waiting in the hallway, his expression carefully neutral. "Allow me to carry those for you, Mrs. Huang." "Thank you, Vin," she said, relinquishing the luggage. "How long have you known?" The man had the grace to look ashamed. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Huang. It's not my place to—" "It's all right," she interrupted. "I understand. You were just doing your job." They descended the staircase in silence. In the foyer, Tam noticed Mrs. Lin, the housekeeper, hovering anxiously near the kitchen door. The older woman's eyes were red-rimmed, and she clutched a handkerchief. "Mrs. Lin," Tam called softly. The housekeeper hurried over, glancing nervously toward the stairs. "Oh, Mrs. Huang," she whispered, grasping Tam's hands. "This is so wrong. So wrong." She pressed something into Tam's palm. "My sister owns a small apartment building in District 7. Not fancy, but clean and safe. Go there tonight. Tell her I sent you." Tam looked down at the piece of paper with an address and phone number. "Thank you," she said, tears threatening again at this small kindness. Mrs. Lin embraced her quickly, then stepped back as footsteps sounded on the stairs. Kai appeared, now fully dressed in casual designer wear, Deep clinging to his arm like a designer accessory. "Ah, right on schedule," he said, his tone inappropriately cheerful. "I trust everything is in order. Vin?" "Yes, sir," the security chief replied, his eyes fixed on a point above Kai's head. Tam straightened her spine, determined not to show weakness. I'll have my lawyer contact yours, she said formally. Kai waved his hand dismissively. As you wish, though it would be simpler to just sign what my lawyer sends you. He pulled an envelope from his pocket. A temporary allowance to get you settled. $5,000. I'm not completely heartless. The amount a pittance to Kai, who spent more on wine in a month, was clearly meant to humiliate her. Tam left the envelope untouched on the console table. Keep it, she said. I earned my own money before I met you. I can do it again. Deep laughed. Good luck finding a company that will hire you after Kai blacklists you. She ran her fingers through Kai's hair possessively. And he will? Tam met her husband's eyes one last time, searching for any remnant of the man she thought she'd married. She found nothing but cold calculation. Goodbye, and Kai, she said simply, then turned and walked out the front door without looking back. Outside, the night air felt oppressive, heavy with the promise of rain. Vin loaded her suitcases into her Bentley, a third anniversary gift from Kai that she now realized would likely be repossessed soon. Mrs. Huang, Vin said quietly as he closed the trunk. For what it's worth, many of us on staff. He trailed off, glancing nervously at the house. We respect you greatly. What's happening isn't right. Tam nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She got into the car and started the engine, then rolled down the window. Take care of yourself, Vin, she said. You as well. Mrs. Huang, he hesitated, then added. Mr. Huang has powerful friends. Be careful. With that cryptic warning, he stepped back, allowing her to drive away from the mansion that had been her home and into an uncertain future. As the estate disappeared behind her, the first heavy raindrops began to fall, matching the tears that finally spilled down her cheeks. She drove automatically, her mind racing through options. She had some personal savings, not much, as most of their finances had been joint accounts that Kai would certainly freeze by morning. She had her education and experience, but Deep's threat of blacklisting was not idle. Kai's influence extended throughout Saigon's business community. The baby kicked again, a firm reminder of her responsibility. She couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. We'll be okay, she repeated to her unborn child, trying to convince herself as much as the baby. Mama will figure this out. At a red light, she pulled out her phone and checked the recording. It had captured everything: Kai's dismissal of his own child, Diep's cruel words, their plans to ensure Tam received minimal support. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then she remembered the USB drive from the safe. What was on it? Why had she never seen it before? The light turned green, and Tam continued driving toward District 7 and Mrs. Lin's sister's apartment building. Tomorrow she would find a lawyer and begin planning her next steps. Tonight, she needed a safe place to rest and process the brutal upheaval of her life. As she drove through the rainy streets of Saigon, one hand resting protectively on her belly, Tam made a silent promise to her unborn son. He may not want you, but I will love you enough for two parents, and one day we'll show them both just how wrong they were to throw us away. The Bentley disappeared into the stormy night, carrying Tam away from the life she had known and toward a future she could not yet imagine, a future that would eventually bring Huang Kai to his knees. Min Tam stared at the peeling paint on the ceiling of her new temporary home, a stark contrast to the hand-painted Italian frescoes of the mansion she'd left 3 weeks ago. The small one-bedroom apartment in District 7 was clean but sparse, with second-hand furniture and unreliable plumbing. Mrs. Lin's sister, a kind widow named Mrs. Tran, had charged her minimal rent and asked no questions. Tam shifted uncomfortably on the narrow bed, her 7-month belly making it difficult to find a position that didn't strain her back. Sleep had become elusive, her mind constantly replaying the moment she'd opened that bedroom door to find her husband with Diep. Her phone buzzed with an incoming email. Another rejection. That made 17 job applications. 17 rejections, all from companies with connections to Kai Group. Kai had made good on his threat to blacklist her. She set the phone aside and struggled to sit up. On the small desk across the room sat her laptop and the mysterious USB drive she'd taken from the safe. For 3 weeks, she'd been afraid to look at its contents, afraid of what further betrayals she might discover. But today, something urged her to face whatever truths it held. The laptop hummed to life, and Tam inserted the drive. A single folder appeared, labeled Insurance. Inside were hundreds of files, financial spreadsheets, offshore account details, emails, and photographs. As she opened document after document, a clear picture emerged, evidence of Kai's systematic tax evasion, money laundering through ghost real estate projects, and bribes to government officials. Tam sat back, stunned. She'd created this USB as a form of protection after noticing discrepancies in Kai Group's financial reports during her time as the company's financial director. Before marrying Kai, she'd been responsible for restructuring the company's finances. She'd discovered these irregularities but had convinced herself they were simply aggressive tax strategies rather than outright fraud. When Kai proposed, she'd stepped down from her position to avoid conflicts of interest, storing this evidence away and eventually forgetting about it. Now it seemed like a lifeline, concrete proof that could destroy Kai's empire and reputation. It was also dangerous. People with Kai's influence didn't respond kindly to threats. A sharp pain in her abdomen made her gasp. The doctor had warned her about stress affecting the pregnancy. She needed to calm down, to think clearly. Her phone rang, an unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. Min Tom, a male voice, vaguely familiar. Yes, who is this? Min Kwan. We studied together at Harvard. I heard about your situation. Tam's mind flashed back to a serious young man who'd graduated at the top of their class in international law. Kwan, how did you find me? That's a long story, he replied. I'm currently in Saigon heading a new law firm specializing in high-profile divorces and corporate malfeasance. I'd like to help you, if you'll let me. Tam's instincts warned caution. Did Kai send you? Kwan's laugh was bitter. Hardly. Let's just say our interests align in seeing Huang Kai face consequences for his actions, both personal and professional. Can we meet? Another sharp pain made her wince. I'm not feeling well today. Perhaps tomorrow. Of course. Are you all right? Do you need medical attention? The concern in his voice seemed genuine. I'm fine, she assured him. Just pregnancy discomfort. I understand. Text me your address, and I'll come to you tomorrow morning. And Tam, don't trust anyone connected to Kai. His reach is extensive. After hanging up, Tam debated whether to send her address. Could she trust this blast from her past? She had few options and fewer allies. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw Mrs. Tran holding a tray. I brought you some pho, the landlady said when Tam opened the door. You need to eat for the baby. Thank you, Tam said, genuinely touched by the woman's kindness. Mrs. Tran set the tray down on the small table. A man was asking about you earlier. Well-dressed, expensive car. Said he was an old friend. Tam tensed. Did he give a name? No. I told him no one by your name lived here. The older woman's eyes were shrewd. I may not know your troubles, you child, but I recognize a woman running from something, or someone. Thank you, Tam said again, this time for the discretion. Be careful, Mrs. Tran advised. Men like that, men with money and power, they don't give up easily what they consider theirs. After the landlady left, Tam sat down with the steaming bowl of pho, her appetite gone despite the delicious aroma. Kai was looking for her. Why, he'd made it clear he wanted nothing to do with her or the baby, unless... She glanced at the USB drive still plugged into her laptop. Unless he'd remembered what might be on it. Decision made. She texted her address to Kwan, adding, come at 9 a.m. I have something important to show you. That night, pain woke her from a fitful sleep. Sharp, cramping pains that came in waves. Too early, she thought in panic. The baby wasn't due for another 2 months. She fumbled for her phone, calling the emergency number her doctor had given her. The pain intensified, and she felt a warm wetness between her legs. When she pulled back the covers, she saw blood. "Please," she gasped into the phone when the nurse answered. "Something's wrong with my baby." The next hours passed in a blur of ambulance sirens, hospital corridors, and medical jargon. Preeclampsia, the doctor said. Dangerously high blood pressure caused by stress, threatening both her life and her baby's. "We need to perform an emergency C-section," the doctor told her. "The baby is in distress." "But it's too early," Tam protested weakly, her vision blurring at the edges. "We have no choice," the doctor replied grimly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Huang, but we must act now or risk losing both of you." As they wheeled her into the operating room, Tam prayed for the first time in years. Not for herself, but for the innocent life inside her, a child unwanted by his father, but desperately loved by his mother. The harsh operating room lights were the last thing she saw before anesthesia pulled her under. She woke to the steady beep of monitors and the antiseptic smell of hospital. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind. Then memory crashed back: the pain, the blood, the emergency surgery. "My baby," she croaked, her throat raw from intubation. A nurse appeared at her bedside. "He's in the NICU, Mrs. Huang. Very small but fighting hard, just like his mother." "Oh, he's alive!" Tears of relief flooded Tam's eyes. "Yes, a tiny warrior at 1.5 kilos, but the doctors are cautiously optimistic." "When can I see him?" "Soon. You need to recover your strength first. You lost a lot of blood." As the nurse checked her vitals, Tam noticed a man standing in the doorway, tall, with intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. He looked vaguely familiar. Min Quan, she guessed. He stepped into the room. "I came to your apartment as arranged. Your landlady told me what happened." He hesitated. "I hope I'm not intruding." Tam shook her head weakly. "I'm glad you're here. Did you bring a laptop? I need to show you something important." "It can wait until you're stronger," he said gently. "No." Her voice was surprisingly firm. "It can't wait. Kai is looking for me, and I think I know why." She explained about the USB drive, still in her apartment. Kwan's expression turned grave. "If what you're saying is true, this evidence could put Kai away for years. It could also put you in danger." He pulled out his phone. "I'll have my assistant retrieve the drive immediately." As he stepped out to make the call, the nurse returned. "Mrs. Huang, there's a man insisting on seeing you. He claims to be your husband." Ice flooded Tam's veins. "Kai is here. He's quite agitated. Hospital policy requires us to ask you before allowing family members in when there's no official documentation." "I don't want to see him," Tam said firmly. "Under no circumstances is he to enter this room or see my son." The nurse nodded, but looked uncertain. "He's being very insistent. Should I call security?" "Yes," Quan said, returning in time to hear the exchange. "And inform him that Mrs. Huang's legal representative is present." He handed the nurse his business card. "Any communication must go through me." After the nurse left, Tam looked at Quan gratefully. "Thank you. I don't understand why he's here. He made it very clear he wanted nothing to do with us." "My guess he's realized what might be on that USB," Quan replied grimly. "My assistant is on her way to your apartment now. Once we have the evidence, we can decide our next steps." A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Kai's voice carried clearly through the door. "I demand to see my wife and child. Do you know who I am? I could buy this entire hospital." Quan moved to stand protectively near Tam's bed. "Classic intimidation tactics," he muttered. "He's not used to being denied." The door burst open, and Kai strode in, his usual polish marred by signs of strain, loosened tie, disheveled hair, eyes wild with something that might have been fear. He stopped short at the sight of Quan. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. "Min Quan, Mrs. Huang's attorney." Quan replied calmly, "You're trespassing, Mr. Huang. I suggest you leave before security removes you." Kai ignored him, focusing on Tam. "Where is it?" he asked without preamble. "Where is what?" Tam replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Don't play games with me. Tam, the USB from the safe. I know you took it." "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, buying time for Quan's assistant to retrieve the drive. Kai's facade cracked further, desperation bleeding through. "That drive contains sensitive company information. It's corporate property, not yours to take." "Interesting," Quan interjected. "What kind of sensitive information would cause such concern?" Kai shot him a venomous look. "This doesn't concern you. As Mrs. Huang's legal representative, everything concerning her welfare concerns me," Quan replied smoothly. "Including harassment from her estranged husband during a medical emergency." Security guards appeared in the doorway. "Sir, we need you to leave." For a moment, Kai looked like he might resist. Then, visibly collecting himself, he straightened his tie. "This isn't over, Tam," he said quietly. "Think carefully about what you do next. You're not the only one with something to lose." After he was escorted out, Tam sank back against the pillows, exhausted by the confrontation. "He's desperate," Quan observed. "That's good for us, but it also makes him dangerous." His phone buzzed with a text. "My assistant has the USB. I'll review the contents and secure the evidence." "Be careful," Tam warned. "Kai has powerful connections." "So do I," Quan assured her. "Rest now. Focus on getting stronger for your son. I'll handle Kai and his threats." As he turned to leave, Tam called after him. "Quan, why are you helping me? You mentioned our interests align in seeing Kai face consequences." "What did you mean?" Quan paused at the door, his expression darkening. "My sister worked for Kai Group 3 years ago. She caught Kai embezzling funds and threatened to report him." His voice tightened. "She committed suicide a week later at least. That's what the police report said." "I never believed it." Tam covered her mouth in horror. "I'm so sorry. I've been building a case against him ever since, but never had enough evidence." His smile was grim. "Until now, perhaps." After Quan left, a nurse helped Tam into a wheelchair and took her to the NICU to see her son for the first time. Through the incubator glass, she gazed at the tiny form covered in tubes and monitors, so small, so vulnerable, yet tenaciously holding on to life. "Hello, my little fighter," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she placed her hand against the glass. "Mama's here. We're going to be okay, I promise." In that moment, something hardened within Mintam, a resolve that transcended fear and uncertainty. Kai had discarded them both as worthless, but she would prove him wrong. She would not only survive, she would ensure that Huang Kai paid for every cruel word, every betrayal, every threat. As she watched her son's tiny chest rise and fall with each precious breath, Tom made another silent vow: this child would never know abandonment or cruelty. He would be raised with love, integrity, and strength. And one day, he would inherit everything his father had tried to deny him. The empire Kai had built on lies and exploitation would fall, and from its ashes, Tam would build something better, something worthy of the fierce little fighter before her. 3 weeks later, Mintam sat beside her son's incubator in the NICU, reading financial reports Quan had brought her. Little Min Koi, named for his fighting spirit, had defied medical expectations, gaining weight steadily and breathing increasingly on his own. "You're as stubborn as your mother," she told him softly, touching his tiny hand through the incubator port. His fingers reflexively curled around hers, and the simple gesture filled her with renewed determination. The door opened, and Quan entered, carrying his ever-present briefcase. His expression was grimmer than usual. "What's wrong?" Tam asked immediately. "Kai's making moves," he replied, keeping his voice low. "He's liquidating assets, transferring funds offshore. I think he's preparing to flee the country. Tam frowned. He must be truly desperate. He is. The evidence on that USB is damning enough to put him away for decades, but we need to act quickly before he disappears with the money. What do you suggest? Quan sat down opposite her. It's time to go on the offensive. I've prepared legal documents to freeze Kai's assets pending investigation. I've also arranged a meeting with the Economic Police's Financial Crimes Unit. Tam hesitated, looking at her fragile son. What about Koi? I can't leave him. The meeting isn't until next week. By then, the doctors say he might be strong enough for you to hold him properly. Kwan's expression softened. He's a fighter, just like his name suggests. Tam nodded, thinking. There's something else we should consider, she said finally. The charity gala next month. Kai never misses it. It's his big publicity event of the year, where he plays the generous philanthropist. You want to confront him publicly? Kwan looked skeptical. Not just confront him, expose him, with witnesses from every level of Saigon society. Her eyes gleamed with purpose. If we time the legal actions correctly, we could have him arrested at the event itself. Kwan whistled softly. That's bold, also incredibly risky. Kai will be surrounded by allies. And I'll be surrounded by truth, Tam replied firmly. Plus, I have information that Deep is pushing him to announce their engagement at the gala. The timing would be poetic. A slow smile spread across Kwan's face. I've secured a court date for the asset freeze hearing 3 days before the gala. If we win, and with this evidence, Kai will be desperate, making mistakes. Perfect. Tam stroked her son's tiny arm. By then, Koi might be ready to leave the hospital. I want him safe before everything explodes. I'll arrange security, Kwan promised. My firm has connections with ex-military personnel who can protect you both. As they finalized details, a nurse entered. Mrs. Huang, the doctor says you can hold your son today. We're ready to try kangaroo care if you are. Tam's heart leaped. Yes, of course, Kwan stood. I'll give you privacy for this moment. We'll continue planning tomorrow. After he left, the nurse helped Tam prepare, showing her how to open her shirt to create skin-to-skin contact. With infinite care, the tiny baby was lifted from his incubator and placed against Tam's chest, a small cap protecting his head, his minute body covered with a warm blanket. The sensation of her son's weight against her heart, so light yet so significant, brought tears to Tam's eyes. This was what she was fighting for. This perfect, innocent being who deserved every opportunity, every advantage his father had tried to deny him. I promise you, my little fighter, she whispered against his downy head, your father will regret the day he threw us away, and you will have everything you deserve and more. The day of the gala arrived with the precision of a well-orchestrated military operation. In the preceding weeks, Tam and Kwan had executed their plan methodically. The court had frozen Kai's domestic assets based on evidence of financial crimes. The economic police had opened a formal investigation. Kai, increasingly desperate, had accelerated his plans to flee, unaware that his every move was being monitored. Tam stood before the mirror in her hotel suite, assessing her reflection. The midnight blue gown purchased with her own money. Not Kai's accentuated her postpartum figure without apology. She had given birth 2 months early and hadn't regained her pre-pregnancy physique, but the dress celebrated rather than concealed this reality. Her hair was swept up elegantly, her makeup subtle but flawless, highlighting the new determination in her eyes. A soft coo drew her attention to the bassinet beside her bed, where Min Koi lay awake, his eyes so like her own, tracking her movements. Against all odds, he had grown strong enough to leave the hospital a week earlier, though he remained smaller than typical 3-month-olds. What do you think, little warrior? She asked, leaning down to stroke his cheek. Is Mama ready to face the dragon? He grasped her finger, his tiny grip surprisingly strong. Tam took it as endorsement. A knock at the door announced Kwan's arrival. He entered, resplendent in a tailored tuxedo, accompanied by a middle-aged woman in a conservative dress. Mrs. Tran has agreed to watch Koi tonight, he explained, gesturing to the landlady who had shown Tam such kindness. 2 security personnel will remain in the hotel suite with them. 3 more will accompany us to the gala. Tam embraced Mrs. Tran gratefully. Thank you for doing this. It's my pleasure, the older woman replied, already moving toward the bassinet to coo at Koi. This little one and I will be just fine. You go and reclaim what was stolen from you both. In the limousine en route to the gala, Kwan reviewed the plan once more. The economic police will arrive at 9:30 after Kai's speech. Their warrant covers both his arrest and Deep's as an accomplice. All the evidence has been verified and secured. Tam nodded, her stomach nodding with anticipation. And the press, in position. The story breaks simultaneously with the arrest in every major newspaper and online outlet. He patted his pocket. I have copies of the USB files if needed, though that shouldn't be necessary at this stage. What about Kai's security team? Neutralized, Kwan assured her. We've identified and isolated his chief of security. The others will stand down when confronted with legal authority. The limousine glided to a stop before the Grand Saigon Hotel, where red carpet led to the entrance of the ballroom hosting the annual charity gala. Photographers lined the walkway, capturing the arrival of Vietnam's elite. As Tam emerged from the car, a momentary hush fell over the crowd, followed by a flurry of flashes and whispers. Her appearance was unexpected. Many had heard rumors of her disgrace and disappearance. She walked the red carpet with head high, Kwan at her side, ignoring the curious stares and murmured questions. Inside, the ballroom was a symphony of crystal, silk, and wealth. Hundreds of Saigon's most influential citizens mingled, champagne glasses in hand, pretending philanthropy while engaging in the real business of the evening, networking and being seen. Tam spotted Kai immediately. He stood near the stage, Deep clinging to his arm in a revealing red gown, both of them surrounded by sycophants. The sight of them so smug, so certain of their victory, sent a surge of cold resolve through her. Ready, Kwan murmured. Absolutely, she replied, her voice steady. They circulated strategically, Tam greeting former acquaintances with gracious composure, neither seeking nor avoiding attention. The buzz of her presence spread through the room like ripples in a pond, eventually reaching Kai and Diep. Tam watched the moment Kai noticed her. His eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in fury. He whispered something to Diep, whose head whipped around, her expression morphing from confusion to rage as she spotted Tam. Ignore them for now, Kwan advised. Let them stew. The evening progressed according to schedule. Dinner was served. Pleasantries exchanged. Throughout it all, Tam maintained her composure, even as she felt Kai's glare burning into her from across the room. At 9:15, the Master of Ceremonies called Kai to the stage for his annual address. He ascended with practiced confidence, though Tam noted the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted the microphone. Distinguished guests, he began, his voice echoing through the ballroom. Welcome to the 10th Annual Kai Group Charity Gala. Tonight, we celebrate a decade of giving back to our community. Tam tuned out his platitudes, watching instead for signs of the approaching economic police. Right on cue, at 9:28, she noticed movement at the ballroom entrance, men and women in suits, clearly not gala attendees, being directed by hotel staff. Kai, oblivious to the approaching storm, was building to his climax. And on this special occasion, I have a personal announcement to make. He gestured toward Diep, who preened visibly. I would like to introduce the future Mrs. Huang, my fiancée, Ngoc Diep. Applause rippled through the room as Diep joined him on stage, her smile triumphant as she displayed a massive diamond ring. Kai pulled her close possessively. Together, he continued, we plan to expand Kai Group's philanthropic initiatives and create a legacy that will... Huang Kai. The amplified voice cut through his speech. A senior police official stood at the ballroom entrance, flanked by officers. You are under arrest for tax evasion, money laundering, and embezzlement. Silence crashed over the room like a physical wave. Kai froze mid-sentence, his face draining of color. Deep's smile faltered, then disappeared entirely. "This is absurd," Kai sputtered into the microphone. "A mistake. I demand to know who—" His eyes found Tam in the crowd, and understanding dawned on his face, followed by naked hatred. "You!" he hissed, the microphone carrying his voice throughout the stunned ballroom. "You did this!" Tam stood, drawing all eyes to her. "No, Kai," she replied, her voice clear and steady. "You did this to yourself." The police advanced through the crowd, which parted before them like the Red Sea. On stage, Deep was backing away from Kai, her self-preservation instincts evidently stronger than her loyalty. "Arrest her too," the police official ordered, gesturing toward Deep. "She's implicated in the financial crimes." "What, no?" Deep shrieked, backing away further. "I didn't know anything. It was all him." Kai's face contorted with rage. "You lying bitch, you were part of this from the beginning." Their unified front collapsed instantly as self-interest took precedence. The assembled elite watched in scandalized fascination as both were handcuffed and read their rights, their accusations against each other growing increasingly hysterical. As they were led past Tam, Kai lunged toward her, held back only by the officers restraining him. "I'll destroy you for this," he snarled, all pretense of sophistication abandoned. "You and that worthless spawn of yours." Tam met his gaze unflinchingly. "You already tried," she replied calmly. "You failed." After they were escorted out, an expectant hush fell over the ballroom, all eyes on Tam. The master of ceremonies stood frozen beside the podium, clearly uncertain how to proceed after such unprecedented events. Quan nudged Tam gently. "The floor is yours," he murmured. "Make it count." Taking a deep breath, Tam walked to the stage and addressed the stunned crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to this evening's festivities. As many of you know, I was Huang Kai's wife. What you may not know is that 3 months ago, he discarded me while I was 6 months pregnant with his child, replacing me with Miss Dieppe, who you just saw escorted out alongside him." Her voice remained steady, dignified. "I am not here for revenge or scandal. I am here because the charities supposedly benefiting from tonight's generosity deserve better than funds tainted by fraud. As the new interim CEO of what will now be called Min Group, I pledge to honor all charitable commitments made by the previous administration, with transparent accounting and genuine philanthropic intent." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, surprise, speculation, grudging respect. "I stand before you not as a victim, but as a survivor. My son, Min Koi, was born prematurely due to the stress of my circumstances. But like his mother, he is a fighter. Together, we will transform Kai Group into a company built on integrity rather than exploitation." She paused, surveying the room. "I invite those of you who value ethical business practices to join us in this new chapter. As for tonight, please, enjoy the remainder of the evening. The champagne is excellent, and the cause is worthy, regardless of who signs the checks." With that, she stepped away from the microphone to thunderous applause. As she descended from the stage, guests surrounded her, some offering congratulations, others seeking to align themselves with the emerging new power, all recognizing that Saigon's business landscape had irrevocably shifted. Later that night, after fielding countless questions from police, press, and curious gala attendees, Tam returned to her hotel suite. Mrs. Tran met her at the door, finger to lips. "The little one just fell asleep," she whispered. "How did it go?" "Exactly as planned," Tam replied, slipping off her heels with a sigh of relief. "Kai and Dieppe are in custody. The asset freeze is in full effect. By morning, everyone in Vietnam will know the story." She moved to the bassinet, gazing down at her sleeping son. His tiny chest rose and fell peacefully, unaware that his future had been secured in a single dramatic evening. "He looks more like you every day," Mrs. Tran observed. "A blessing, considering his father." Tam smiled softly. He's his own person. That's blessing enough. After Mrs. Tran departed, Tam changed into comfortable sleepwear and settled into an armchair beside the bassinet. Her phone buzzed continuously with messages and notifications, but she ignored them all, content to watch her son sleep. A knock at the door roused her from her contemplation. Quan stood outside, still in his tuxedo, though his tie was loosened. I thought you might want to see this before you sleep, he said, handing her a tablet. The screen displayed a news website with the headline, Billionaire Hong Kai, arrested at charity gala. Wife exposes financial crimes and takes control of empire. Below was a photo of Kai and Daip being escorted out in handcuffs, their faces contorted with rage and fear. Beside it was an image of Tam at the podium, composed and dignified despite the chaos surrounding her. The beginning of a new era, Quan said, satisfaction evident in his voice. The prosecutors are confident the charges will stick. With the evidence we provided, Kai is facing at least 15 years, and Diep, 5 to 7, depending on how much she cooperates. She's already offering to testify against Kai in exchange for leniency. He chuckled mirthlessly. Honor among thieves, as they say. Tam set the tablet aside. Thank you, Quan, for everything. My sister would be proud, he replied simply. Justice delayed, but not denied. After he left, Tam stood by the window, looking out at the glittering Saigon skyline. Somewhere out there, Kai sat in a holding cell, his empire crumbling, his freedom forfeit, his reputation destroyed, all because he'd underestimated the woman he'd discarded. She thought of the recording she'd made that fateful night, Kai and Diep discussing how to dispose of her and the unwanted child. How different things might have been if they'd shown even a modicum of decency or compassion. Koi stirred in his sleep, making the tiny snuffling noises that never failed to melt her heart. Tam moved to the bassinet and gently stroked his cheek. You see, little warrior, she whispered. One phone call. That's all it took to bring down his empire. One call to the right person, with the right evidence, at the right time. In the end, it hadn't been revenge that motivated her, but justice for herself, for Quan's sister, for her son, and for all those Kai had exploited in his ruthless climb to the top. The empire he'd built on lies now lay in ruins. And from those ruins, Tam would construct something worthy of the child sleeping peacefully before her. 3 years passed like the turning pages of a novel, each chapter bringing new challenges, triumphs, and transformations. Seated in the CEO's office of the Min Group headquarters, Tam gazed out through floor-to-ceiling windows at the Saigon skyline, so different from the view she'd once shared with Kai. Mama, look! 2.5-year-old Min Koi burst into the office, waving a drawing proudly. Despite his premature birth, he had grown into a healthy, vibrant toddler with his mother's intelligent eyes and determined chin. Tam swiveled her chair to face him, arms outstretched. What have you created today, my little artist? Koi climbed onto her lap, proudly displaying a colorful scribble that, with generous interpretation, might represent their home. It's us, you, me, and Uncle Quan. It's beautiful, she praised, hugging him close. Despite the demands of rebuilding and rebranding a corporate empire, Tam had made an unbreakable rule: every day included quality time with her son. Unlike his father, she would never prioritize business over family. A gentle knock interrupted their moment. Quan entered, carrying a stack of legal documents. 3 years of collaboration had cemented their friendship, his legal brilliance complementing her financial acumen as they transformed Kai Group into Min Group. Sorry to interrupt, he said, smiling at Koi, but the final judgment came through. Tam's heart quickened. And rushed 15 years as expected. All appeals exhausted. Quan's satisfaction was evident. Kai will serve his full sentence. Deep received 7 years with the possibility of parole after 5, in exchange for her testimony. Tam nodded. Emotions complex, not joy. Exactly, she'd moved beyond seeking satisfaction from Kai's downfall, but a sense of closure, of justice served. They're running a feature on tonight's news, Quan continued. They want a statement from you. The usual, Tam replied. Min Group is focused on the future, not the past. We wish to be judged by our actions, not by the scandal that preceded our formation. The measured response had become her standard, transforming her from tabloid fodder, the pregnant wife discarded for a younger model, into a respected business leader known for ethical practices and innovation. The transformation hadn't been easy. The first year after Kai's arrest had been a baptism by fire. Shareholders panicked, partners withdrew, employees feared for their jobs. Tam had worked 20-hour days, nursing Koi while restructuring the company, replacing corrupt executives with ethical professionals, rebuilding relationships with legitimate business partners. The New Light Foundation, her charitable organization helping single mothers, domestic violence survivors, and underprivileged children, had initially been viewed cynically as a PR stunt. Now it was recognized as one of Vietnam's most effective philanthropical operations, with Tam personally mentoring women rebuilding their lives after trauma. Your 3 o'clock appointment arrived early, Quan mentioned, checking his watch. Dr. Trung Nghia, the cardiac surgeon interested in partnering on the hospital expansion project. Tam nodded, having almost forgotten the meeting amid the news about Kai's final sentence. Could you entertain Koi for a few minutes? I'll freshen up before the meeting. With pleasure, Quan held out his hand to the toddler. How about we raid the secret candy stash in my office? Little man. Yes, Koi cheered, slipping from his mother's lap. The chocolate ones. After they left, Tam touched up her makeup and straightened her tailored suit. At 35, she had grown into her power. No longer the shell-shocked pregnant woman expelled from her home 3 years ago. Her features had matured, grief and triumph etching subtle lines that spoke of a life fully lived. The intercom buzzed. Dr. Trung Nghia is here. Ms. Min. Send him in, please. The man who entered was not what she expected. Cardiac surgeons, in her experience, tended toward arrogance. But Dr. Nghia carried himself with quiet confidence rather than swagger. Tall, with kind eyes behind stylish glasses. He smiled warmly as he extended his hand. Ms. Min, thank you for seeing me. Your hospital initiative is exactly the kind of project I hope to find upon returning to Vietnam. His voice was pleasantly deep, his handshake firm without being domineering. Tam gestured toward the sitting area, rather than conducting the meeting across her imposing desk, a technique she'd developed to create collaborative rather than hierarchical discussions. You've recently returned from abroad, Dr. Nghia. Please, just Nghia. Yes, I've spent the last decade at Massachusetts General, but Vietnam has always been home. He settled into an armchair. I wanted to bring my experience back where it's most needed. Something in his manner, earnest without pretension, appealed to Tam. The meeting, scheduled for 30 minutes, stretched to 2 hours as they discussed not just the hospital project, but their visions for healthcare in Vietnam, the balance between cutting-edge technology and compassionate care, and even their respective educational experiences in America. When Koi burst in again, chocolate evident around his mouth despite Quan's apologetic expression in the doorway, Tam expected the usual professional discomfort that many businessmen displayed around children in the workplace. Instead, Nghia knelt to Koi's level. Hello there. You must be the young man I've heard so much about. I'm Nghia. What fantastic adventure were you on today? Koi, normally shy with strangers, launched into an elaborate tale involving dinosaurs, rockets, and chocolate asteroids. Nghia listened with genuine interest, asking questions that delighted the boy. Something shifted in Tam's perception, a recognition of qualities she'd forgotten could exist in a man: kindness, emotional intelligence, authentic interest in a child not his own. I should let you get back to your day, Nghia said eventually, rising. But I'd be honored to continue our discussion about the project, perhaps dinner sometime. The invitation hung in the air, its dual nature, professional and potentially personal, evident to both adults. "I'd like that," Tam replied, surprising herself with how much she meant it. After he left, Quan raised an eyebrow. "That went well. The partnership makes strategic sense," Tam said neutrally, though she couldn't quite suppress her smile. "Mm-hmm," Quan hummed skeptically. "Purely business, I'm sure." Dinner with Nia became a weekly occurrence, initially focused on the hospital project, but gradually expanding to include their personal histories, philosophies, hopes. Tam found herself laughing more than she had in years, rediscovering parts of herself that had been suppressed during her marriage to Kai and the subsequent fight for survival. 6 months into their friendship, for they were careful to maintain professional boundaries, despite the growing attraction, Nia invited Tom and Koi on a picnic at a botanical garden outside the city. Under the shade of flowering trees, watching Koi chase butterflies while Nia pointed out different species, Tam felt a contentment she'd thought forever beyond her reach. "He's remarkable," Nia said, observing Koi. "So resilient, so curious. You've done an amazing job." Tam. "Thank you," she smiled, watching her son. "He makes it easy to be a good mother. He's the opposite of his father in every way that matters." Ngia was silent for a moment. "May I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. I may not answer," she replied, only half joking. "Do you ever wish things had been different with Kai? Not that you'd stayed with him," he clarified quickly, "but that the separation had been less traumatic." Tam considered the question seriously. "At first, yes. I thought if he'd been kinder about ending our marriage, if he'd acknowledged our child, everything would have hurt less." She shook her head. "But now, I'm not so sure. That pain forced me to find strength I didn't know I possessed. It made me rebuild my life on my terms, not his or anyone else's." Nhia nodded thoughtfully. "The Japanese have a concept called kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold. The idea is that something broken and mended can be more beautiful, more valuable than it was before." "Are you calling me broken pottery? Doctor," she teased. He laughed. "Hardly. I'm saying that surviving what you didn't just make you strong, it made you extraordinary." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the garden, Koi, the world itself seemed to recede. Gia leaned forward slightly, hesitant, questioning. Tam closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that felt like the first page of a new chapter. Unlike Kai's kisses demanding, possessive, Ngia's was gentle, respectful, yet no less passionate for its tenderness. "Mama, are you kissing Dr. Nhia?" Koi's voice broke the moment, his tone more curious than scandalized. Tam pulled back, cheeks flushing. "Yes, sweetheart. Is that okay with you?" Koi considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. "Does this mean Dr. Nhia will read me more dinosaur stories?" Nhia laughed. "Absolutely. Anytime you want, then it's okay." Koi nodded decisively before running off to investigate a particularly interesting leaf. Their relationship progressed with thoughtful deliberation. Nhia understood Tom's caution, her need to protect both her heart and her son's. He integrated himself into their lives gradually, never pushing, always respectful of boundaries. When he proposed a year later, during a beach vacation with Koi building sandcastles nearby, Tam's acceptance came without reservation. They married in a simple ceremony by the ocean, with Koi as ring-bearer and Quan as best man. Mrs. Tran, who had provided sanctuary when Tam needed it most, sat in the place of honor usually reserved for the mother of the bride. The 5th anniversary of Kai's arrest found Tam in her office, reviewing quarterly reports that showed Min Group's continued growth and stability. Under her leadership, the company had divested from questionable ventures, established transparent accounting practices, and expanded into socially responsible investments, including the state-of-the-art children's hospital spearheaded by Nghia. Her assistant interrupted with an unusual message. There's a letter for you, Ms. Min, from Namha Correctional Facility. Tam stared at the envelope, immediately recognizing the prison where Kai was serving his sentence. For 5 years, she'd had no contact with him, despite his numerous attempts to communicate. What could he possibly say now that would matter? Curiosity overcame reluctance. She opened the letter, recognizing Kai's once elegant handwriting, now cramped and uneven. Tam, after 5 years of reflection, I write not seeking forgiveness, which I do not deserve, but to acknowledge truths I was too arrogant to see. You were always the better of us, more intelligent, more ethical, more worthy. I resented your superiority even as I exploited it, using your brilliance to build my empire while planning to discard you once you'd served your purpose. I thought power came from controlling others, from taking what I wanted regardless of cost. You've proven that true power comes from integrity, from building rather than exploiting. I do not ask for your forgiveness or your pity. I ask only that you tell our son, when he is old enough to understand, that his father recognized too late what a privilege it would have been to know him. The empire you've built from the ruins of mine is what Kai Group should have been all along. It is fitting that it bears your name now, not mine. Huang Kai Tam set the letter down, emotions conflicted. The words seemed sincere, yet 5 years was a long time to craft the perfect performance of remorse. Was this genuine redemption or another manipulation? She slipped the letter into her desk drawer without responding. Perhaps someday, when Koi was older and asked about his biological father, she would share it. For now, it was enough to know that Kai recognized the magnitude of what he'd lost, not just his freedom and fortune, but the chance to know his remarkable son and the woman Tam had become. That evening, as she watched Nia reading a bedtime story to Koi and their 1-year-old daughter Mai, Tam reflected on the strange path that had led her here. The pregnant wife caught her husband with his mistress, made one fateful phone call, and brought down an empire built on lies. But more importantly, she had built something new and lasting from the ashes, a life of integrity, purpose, and love. Penny for your thoughts, Nia said softly after tucking in both children. I was just thinking about journeys, she replied, leaning into his embrace. How sometimes the worst detour can lead to the most beautiful destination. Poetic, he murmured, kissing her temple. And true. As they stood together in the peaceful nursery, Tam felt a completeness that transcended her previous definitions of success. The empire she'd built wasn't just Min Group, though that achievement remained significant. It was this family, this love, this life constructed on a foundation of truth rather than deception. Huang Kai had discarded her, believing her worthless without him. In doing so, he had inadvertently set her free to discover her true value, not as someone's wife or mother or victim, but as herself, Min Tam, a woman who had faced betrayal and emerged not just surviving, but triumphant. One phone call had indeed destroyed an empire. But from its ruins, she had built a kingdom infinitely more valuable, with a legacy that would endure long after Kai's name was forgotten. She turned to her husband, taking his hand. Let's go home. And they did to the future they were building together, one day at a time, with love, integrity, and the quiet strength that comes from having been broken and reforged, stronger at the mended places than ever before. The end. They say money can't buy happiness, but it can buy silence. It can buy loyalty. And if you're ruthless enough, it can buy someone's life. In the shadow of a Beverly Hills mansion, where crystal chandeliers cast diamonds on marble floors and million-dollar art hangs like trophies on gilded walls, a woman discovered that her fairy tale was built on graves. 7 days. That's how long it takes for a human being to realize that the people you trust most are capable of unimaginable evil. 7 days to understand that survival isn't about what you've lost, it's about what you're willing to become to protect what matters most. Some betrayals cut deep. Others, they forge steel from flesh and turn victims into forces of nature. This is the story of what happens when they lock the wrong woman in a cage and what she does when she gets out. The golden California sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of the Sterling mansion, a palatial estate perched high in the Beverly Hills. This wasn't just any house, this was a testament to power, a 15,000 square foot monument to success that had graced the covers of Architectural Digest 3 times. The mansion's Gothic revival architecture, with its towering spires and ornate stonework, seemed to whisper stories of old European nobility transplanted to American soil. Isabella Romano Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of what had once been her sanctuary, the converted attic studio where she painted. At 28, 7 months pregnant, she embodied a rare combination of Italian fire and American grace. Her long, dark hair caught the afternoon light as she absently stroked her rounded belly, watching the gardeners tend to her beloved rose garden below. Those roses had been her first project when she'd married Alexander 3 years ago, back when she still believed in fairy tales. The canvas before her remained blank, much like her thoughts these days. Pregnancy had made her contemplative, more aware of the subtle changes in her world. Alexander seemed different lately, distant, preoccupied, spending more nights at the office than at home. She told herself it was just the stress of expanding Sterling Corporation, his real estate empire that had made him one of California's youngest billionaires at 42. Alexander Sterling was the kind of man who commanded attention when he entered a room, tall, with silver threading through his dark hair and piercing blue eyes that could negotiate million-dollar deals with a glance. He was Forbes magazine's poster boy for the American dream. From a middle-class family in Ohio, he'd built his empire from nothing, acquiring and developing properties from Los Angeles to San Francisco. His success story was legendary, his charitable contributions well documented, his marriage to the talented artist Isabella Romano, seen as a perfect fairy tale. But fairy tales, Isabella was learning, sometimes had darker chapters. The sound of heels clicking on marble floors drew her attention. Through the studio's glass door, she saw a flash of platinum blonde hair and recognized the confident stride immediately. Vivian Cross, 26 years old, Sterling Corporation's vice president of marketing, and increasingly, a constant presence in their home. Vivian was beautiful in the way that stopped traffic, sharp cheekbones, legs that seemed to go on forever, and a smile that could sell million-dollar properties to people who lived in studio apartments. She joined the company 18 months ago, bringing with her an impressive resume and an even more impressive ability to increase their profit margins by 30% in her first year. What Isabella didn't know was that Vivian Cross had studied her target as meticulously as any corporate acquisition. Born Vivian Rodriguez in East LA, she'd clawed her way out of poverty through a combination of intelligence, ruthlessness, and an absolute refusal to let anyone stand between her and the life she felt she deserved. Changing her name, perfecting her accent, and eliminating every trace of her past had been just the beginning. Isabella tried to shake off her unease as she made her way down the spiral staircase to the main floor. The baby had been particularly active today, and she wanted to share that joy with Alexander. Perhaps they could have dinner together for once, maybe even talk about names for their daughter. The nursery was nearly finished, soft yellow walls with hand-painted butterflies that Isabella had lovingly created during her first trimester. The mansion's main floor sprawled like a luxury hotel lobby, all marble and crystal, with priceless art adorning the walls. Isabella's own paintings hung alongside Picasso's and Monet's. Alexander had always been proud of her talent, often telling guests that he'd married the most gifted artist in California. As she approached Alexander's study, she heard voices, his familiar baritone mixed with Vivian's melodic laugh. The study door was slightly ajar, and something about the intimacy of their conversation made Isabella pause. "You know I can't keep doing this, Vivian?" Alexander's voice carried a weight Isabella rarely heard. "Isabella is 7 months pregnant. This isn't the time for what? Darling," Vivian's voice was silk wrapped around steel. "For happiness, for feeling alive again. When was the last time she made you feel the way I do?" Isabella's hand flew to her mouth, her heart hammering so hard she was sure they would hear it. She pressed herself against the hallway wall, her pregnant belly making stealth impossible. But she had to know. She had to hear. "Look at these," Vivian continued, and Isabella heard the rustle of papers. "The Maldives was incredible. Wasn't it just the two of us? No obligations, no complications." The Maldives, Alexander's business trip last month, the one where he'd been too busy to call, where the time difference made communication impossible. Isabella felt her world tilting on its axis. She crept closer to the crack in the door and peered inside. What she saw shattered her heart into 1,000 pieces. Alexander stood behind his massive mahogany desk, but he wasn't alone. Vivian was in his arms, her body pressed against his, their lips locked in a passionate kiss that spoke of familiarity, of countless stolen moments. On the desk before them lay scattered photographs, images of Alexander and Vivian on pristine beaches, sharing intimate dinners, their bodies intertwined in ways that made Isabella's stomach churn. "God, I've missed you," Alexander murmured against Vivian's neck. "These few days apart have been torture." "Then stop torturing yourself," Vivian replied, her perfectly manicured nails trailing down his chest. "You know what needs to be done. Isabella served her purpose. She gave you respectability, the perfect wife image for your business deals. But now she's just excess baggage." Isabella's knees nearly buckled. Excess baggage. 3 years of marriage. Countless nights of love and laughter. The baby growing inside her, all of it reduced to excess baggage. "It's not that simple," Alexander said, but his protest lacked conviction. "The baby will be better off without a mother who's clearly lost her mind." Vivian interrupted smoothly. "Have you seen how she talks to herself in that studio? How she stares into space for hours? Pregnancy has made her unstable. Alex, dangerous, even." The lies fell from Vivian's lips like honey, sweet and poisonous. Isabella realized with growing horror that this wasn't a recent affair. This was a calculated dismantling of her life, orchestrated by a woman who had studied her weaknesses and exploited them with surgical precision. "Besides," Vivian continued, pulling a document from her purse, "I have something that might change your perspective." Alexander took the paper, his eyes widening as he read. "A pregnancy test, you're 8 weeks," Vivian said with a triumphant smile. "Your child, Alex. Our child. The beginning of our real family." Isabella watched her husband's face transform. The guilt and hesitation vanished, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. He pulled Vivian closer, spinning her around the office as she laughed. "This changes everything," he said, his voice filled with an excitement that Isabella hadn't heard since their own pregnancy announcement. "We can be together. Properly. I'll talk to Isabella. Explain." "No need for explanations," Vivian interrupted, her voice taking on a harder edge. "I've already taken care of that problem." Something in Vivian's tone sent ice through Isabella's veins. She pressed closer to the door, straining to hear. "What do you mean?" Alexander asked. Vivian's smile was predatory. "Let's just say that by tomorrow morning, Isabella will be out of the picture permanently." Isabella didn't wait to hear more, her heart pounding. She backed away from the door as quietly as possible, her mind racing. "Out of the picture permanently." The words echoed in her head like a death sentence. She needed to leave. Now. She needed to protect her baby, to find help, to going somewhere. "Isabella." The voice came from behind her, smooth as silk and twice as deadly. Isabella spun around to find Vivian standing at the other end of the hallway, having apparently left the study through another door. The other woman's smile was radiant, but her eyes were cold as winter. I was just looking for Alexander," Isabella stammered, her hand instinctively moving to protect her belly. "Oh, he's busy right now," Vivian said, taking a step closer. "Important business calls. You understand. But don't worry, we have so much to talk about. You and I." Behind Vivian, Isabella noticed 2 men she didn't recognize, large, silent figures in dark suits who had somehow appeared without a sound. Security, perhaps, but not any security she'd ever seen at the house before. Actually, I'm quite tired, Isabella said, trying to keep her voice steady. I think I'll just go to bed. Oh, but I insist. Vivian's voice carried an undertone of steel. After all, we're practically family now, and family should stick together. One of the men stepped forward, and Isabella saw something metallic glint in his hand. A syringe. Sweet dreams, Isabella, Vivian whispered. Isabella tried to run, but 7 months pregnant and caught off guard. She had no chance. The needle found its mark, and darkness rushed up to meet her like an old friend. When consciousness returned, it came slowly, like swimming up through thick mud. Isabella's head pounded. Her mouth felt like cotton, and something was terribly wrong with her surroundings. Instead of her luxurious bedroom with its silk sheets and ocean view, she found herself in a small, dim space that smelled of dust and old wood. The attic? She was in the attic studio, but something was different. The comfortable furniture was gone, replaced by bare floorboards and stark walls. The wide, welcoming door she'd always used was sealed shut, replaced by what looked like a solid metal barrier with an electronic lock. Isabella struggled to her feet, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward and painful. The baby kicked weakly, as if sensing her distress, and Isabella fought back panic. Whatever was happening to her, she couldn't let fear hurt her child. She tried the door, pushing against it with all her strength, but it didn't budge. The electronic lock blinked red, mocking her efforts. She pounded on the metal surface until her fists were raw, screaming Alexander's name until her throat was hoarse. No one came. Through the single small window, Isabella could see the grounds of her former paradise. The rose garden bloomed as beautifully as ever. The fountain sparkled in the afternoon sun, and life continued as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She was a prisoner in her own home. As the hours passed, Isabella began to piece together the magnitude of her situation. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. The reinforced door, the electronic lock, the removal of furniture, all of it spoke of careful planning. Vivian had been preparing this prison for weeks, maybe months. Night fell, and with it came the cold. The attic had no heating, and Isabella's thin silk pajamas provided little protection against the December chill. She found an old paint-stained smock in the corner and wrapped it around herself, curling up on the floor with her back against the wall. Through the window, she could see the warm light spilling from the mansion's windows. In what used to be their bedroom, she saw silhouettes moving Alexander and Vivian, living the life that had once been hers. Why, she whispered to the darkness, her hand resting on her belly. Why is this happening to us, little one? The baby's response was a gentle flutter, and Isabella found strength in that small movement. Whatever Vivian had planned, whatever Alexander had agreed to, Isabella wouldn't give up. She couldn't. She had more than just herself to fight for now. As she drifted into an uneasy sleep on the hard floor, Isabella couldn't know that her real test was just beginning. Tomorrow would bring new horrors, new revelations, and new reasons to fight. But it would also bring something else, the beginning of a plan that would shake the very foundations of the Sterling Empire and expose secrets that would destroy everyone who had underestimated the quiet strength of a mother protecting her child. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Dawn broke over Beverly Hills like a cruel joke, painting the sky in soft pastels that mocked Isabella's nightmare. She woke to find her body cramped and aching from sleeping on the hard floor, her silk pajamas damp with cold sweat in morning dew that had somehow found its way through the ancient window frame. Day one of her imprisonment had begun. Isabella struggled to her feet, every movement a reminder of her vulnerable state. At 7 months pregnant, her body needed proper nutrition, warmth, and comfort, none of which her prison provided. The attic felt like a tomb, sealed off from the world she'd once called home. She inventoried her surroundings with growing despair. The space that had once been her creative sanctuary now contained only dust, shadows, and a few forgotten items from the mansion's previous owners. An old wooden easel stood in one corner, warped with age. A few tubes of dried paint lay scattered on a shelf, their labels faded and unreadable. Most importantly, hidden behind the easel, she found a small canvas bag containing crackers, a water bottle, and some old art supplies provisions she'd stashed months ago during long painting sessions. It wasn't much, but it was something. Through the window, Isabella watched her former life continue without her. Gardeners tended the roses, delivery trucks came and went, and occasionally she caught glimpses of Vivian striding across the grounds like a conquering queen. The other woman had wasted no time claiming her territory. Isabella could see her giving orders to the staff, directing changes to the garden, acting every inch the lady of the manor. The first 3 days were the hardest. Isabella rationed her meager supplies, drinking rainwater that collected in an old paint can and eating crackers so slowly that each one lasted an hour. The baby's movements became weaker, more sporadic, and Isabella fought constant waves of panic. On the morning of the 4th day, she made a discovery that changed everything. While searching through the old art supplies, looking for anything that might help her escape, Isabella's fingers closed around something unexpected, a small silver USB drive, tucked inside an old pencil case she'd forgotten about. Her heart skipped as she remembered Marcus Chen, her closest friend from law school and now her personal attorney, had given this to her 6 months ago. Insurance, he'd called it, pressing the drive into her hand after a particularly tense board meeting at Sterling Corporation. I've been noticing some irregularities in Alexander's business dealings. Bella, financial patterns that don't quite add up. If anything ever happens, if you ever feel unsafe, this contains everything you need to know. At the time, Isabella had dismissed Marcus's concerns as professional paranoia. Alexander was successful, ambitious, but criminal. The idea had seemed absurd. Now, trapped in her own home, she began to wonder what secrets the USB contained. The old laptop she'd kept in the studio for digital art projects still worked, its battery miraculously holding enough charge for her to access the drive. What she found made her blood run cold. Document after document revealed the true nature of Sterling Corporation's success. Alexander wasn't just a real estate mogul, he was a money launderer on an international scale. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands, property purchases with cash that could only have come from illegal sources, and most damning of all, a series of payments to Carlos Mendoza, a notorious drug lord whose cartel controlled trafficking routes from Mexico to California. But the revelations about Alexander paled in comparison to what Isabella discovered about Vivian. Vivian Cross didn't exist, at least, not in any meaningful way, before 18 months ago. The woman who had stolen her husband and destroyed her life was actually Vivian Rodriguez, and her past was painted in blood. 5 years ago, she'd been married to Harold Whitmore, a tech billionaire in Silicon Valley. According to the documents Marcus had compiled, Harold had died suddenly of what appeared to be a heart attack, leaving his young wife his entire fortune. But medical records suggested Harold had been poisoned with a rare toxin that mimicked cardiac arrest. By the time anyone grew suspicious, Vivian had disappeared with $200 million, resurfacing a year later with a new identity and an impeccable new backstory. There were other victims, too. A real estate developer in Miami who died in his sleep after changing his will to favor his new girlfriend. An oil executive in Texas whose accidental overdose had made his fiancée very wealthy indeed. Each time, the woman involved had vanished like smoke, only to reappear somewhere else with a new name and a hunger for the next fortune. Isabella realized with growing horror that she wasn't Vivian's first victim. She was just the latest in a long line of women who had stood between Vivian and wealth. The pregnancy test Vivian had shown Alexander was as fake as everything else about her. Medical records hidden in the deepest files showed that Vivian had undergone a hysterectomy years ago after complications from an illegal abortion. She couldn't have children, but she could certainly fake a pregnancy long enough to secure her position. As Isabella absorbed these revelations, she heard voices from the grounds below. Peering carefully through the window, she saw Alexander and Vivian walking through the rose garden with a third figure, a man she recognized from news reports as Carlos Mendoza himself. Isabella fumbled for the laptop, activating its camera and microphone. The window was old and poorly sealed, and if she positioned herself correctly, she might be able to record their conversation. The next shipment arrives Thursday, she heard Carlos saying, his accent thick, but his English clear. 50 million in product, and we'll need it cleaned through the Miami properties within 2 weeks. That's faster than usual, Alexander replied, and Isabella noted the strain in his voice. The Miami market is already saturated with our legitimate sales. Your legitimate sales are cover, nothing more. Carlos laughed coldly. Vivian understands the business better than you do. Sterling, perhaps you should listen to her more often. Isabella's blood chilled as she watched Vivian step closer to Carlos, her body language suggesting a familiarity that went far beyond business. Carlos is right, darling, Vivian said, her hand trailing down Alexander's arm. You've gotten soft, comfortable, but comfort is dangerous in our line of work. Our line of work, Alexander's voice carried a note of suspicion. Since when is money laundering our work? Vivian, I thought you were just helping with the marketing side. Vivian's laugh was like glass breaking. Oh, Alexander. Sweet, naive Alexander. Did you really think I stumbled into your life by accident? That my impressive resume and perfect timing were just coincidence? Isabella watched her husband's face change as realization dawned. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've been Carlos's partner for 3 years, Vivian replied casually. I'm saying that Sterling Corporation was always meant to be our American operation, and I'm saying that you, my dear husband-to-be, were always meant to be a temporary figurehead. The laptop's microphone picked up every word, every damning admission. Isabella felt a surge of savage satisfaction as she recorded the conversation that would destroy them both. Temporary. Alexander's voice was barely a whisper. Well, yes, Vivian said with mock sympathy. I mean, we can't have you getting cold feet or developing a conscience. Can we? Carlos has some wonderful friends in the disposal business. Isabella watched her husband, the man she loved, who had betrayed her, who had allowed her to be imprisoned, realize that he was as expendable as she was. The irony was almost beautiful. But Vivian wasn't finished. Of course, first we need to deal with your dear wife, she continued. The poor thing is so unstable, locked away in that attic. Who knows what tragic accident might befall her, especially in her delicate condition? Isabella's hand moved protectively to her belly as she heard her death sentence pronounced with casual indifference. You're talking about murder, Alexander said, his voice hollow. I'm talking about business, Carlos interjected. Loose ends. Sterling. Your wife knows too much, sees too much. She has to go. And then we'll be free, Vivian added, moving closer to Alexander. Free to run this empire the way it should be run. Free to expand operations. Free to be together without any complications. Isabella had heard enough. She ended the recording and sat back, her mind racing. She had evidence of money laundering, drug trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. It was enough to destroy them all if she could figure out how to get it to the right people. The problem was escape. The electronic lock on the door was sophisticated, but Isabella remembered something from her college years. Before switching to art, she'd studied computer science for 2 semesters. The knowledge was rusty, but not entirely gone. She spent the next day studying the lock mechanism through the crack under the door, watching for patterns in the blinking lights. Electronic locks had override codes, emergency protocols, if she could figure out the system. As night fell on her 5th day of imprisonment, Isabella made her decision. She couldn't wait for rescue, no one was coming. Marcus probably thought she was on vacation. The staff believed whatever lies Vivian had told them. And Alexander. Alexander was as trapped as she was, just in a different kind of prison. She would have to save herself, using skills she'd nearly forgotten. Isabella began working on the laptop, researching lock systems and hacking techniques. The internet connection was weak but functional, and she used it to download everything she could about the specific model of lock keeping her trapped. By dawn, she had a plan. It would be dangerous if she triggered the wrong sequence. She might lock herself in permanently, but staying was certain death for both her and her baby. Isabella looked at her reflection in the laptop screen, dirty, exhausted, but with eyes that burned with determination. Vivian had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the intelligence and resourcefulness of the woman she tried to destroy. That mistake would cost her everything. As Isabella prepared to implement her escape plan, she whispered a promise to her unborn daughter. "Mommy's going to get us out of here, baby girl, and then we're going to make them pay for what they've done." The war between Isabella Sterling and the monsters who had destroyed her life was about to begin in earnest. Day 7 in the attic brought with it an unexpected gift, the sound of frantic preparation echoing through the mansion below. Through her window, Isabella watched an army of caterers, florists, and event coordinators transform the Sterling estate into something that belonged in a fairy tale. The annual Sterling Foundation Charity Gala she'd completely forgotten. 300 of California's most powerful people would be gathering in her home tonight, including reporters, politicians, and business leaders. The event would be broadcast live on local television as part of the foundation's fundraising efforts. It was perfect. Isabella had spent the previous 2 days working on the lock, using techniques she'd cobbled together from online tutorials and half-remembered computer science classes. The mechanism was sophisticated but not impenetrable. It relied on a digital key card that Vivian carried, but it also had an emergency override that could be triggered with the right sequence of inputs. She'd also made another crucial discovery. Hidden in the old art supplies was a small hand mirror, cracked but functional. Using it, she'd been able to see around the door frame and observe Vivian entering the combination for the backup manual lock, a precaution in case the electronic system failed. Tonight, while Vivian played hostess and Alexander played the grieving husband whose pregnant wife had mysteriously disappeared, Isabella would make her grand entrance. As the sun set over Beverly Hills, Isabella began her final preparations. She'd found an old black dress in a forgotten garment bag, something left behind by the mansion's previous owner. It was vintage, elegant, and most importantly, it fit her pregnant frame. She used water from her emergency supplies to clean herself as best she could, finger-combed her hair into a semblance of respectability, and prepared to face the world. The lock picked easier than she'd expected. Years of neglect had made the manual override loose, and her improvised tools, a hairpin and a piece of wire from the old easel, did their work with surprising efficiency. The electronic lock was trickier, but Isabella had memorized the override sequence from her research. When the final light turned green, she almost sobbed with relief. Freedom. After 7 days of imprisonment, the simple act of opening a door felt like a miracle. Isabella crept down the spiral staircase, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. The mansion was alive with activity servers rushing between the kitchen and the grand ballroom, musicians tuning instruments, photographers testing their equipment. In all the chaos, one more figure in black clothing was easily overlooked. She needed to reach Alexander's study to retrieve the USB drive she'd hidden there months ago, Marcus's insurance that contained backup copies of all the evidence. The laptop in the attic had the recordings of Vivian's confession, but she needed the complete financial records to make her case airtight. The study was empty, and Isabella quickly located the hidden compartment behind the built-in bookshelf where Alexander kept his most sensitive documents. The USB was exactly where she'd left it, along with several other items that might prove useful. As she pocketed the drive, Isabella heard voices approaching. She slipped behind the heavy curtains just as Alexander and Vivian entered the room. "Everything needs to be perfect tonight," Vivian was saying, her voice tight with stress. "The governor will be here, half the state legislature, and 3 different news crews. We can't afford any mistakes." "Sonin, where exactly did you tell people Isabella is?" Alexander asked, and Isabella noted the guilt in his voice. 7 days of her absence had clearly taken a toll on his conscience. "Recuperating at a private spa in Switzerland?" Vivian replied smoothly. "Pregnancy complications requiring specialized treatment. Very hush-hush." very exclusive, the kind of place that doesn't take calls from nosy reporters. And if someone wants to visit her, send flowers. Vivian's laugh was cold. Darling, by the time anyone thinks to question the story, it won't matter. Besides, who's going to doubt the word of grieving widower Alexander Sterling? Isabella's blood chilled. Widower, past tense. The plan moves forward tonight, Vivian continued. During the gala, while everyone is distracted, Carlos's men will take care of the problem upstairs by morning. There will be tragic evidence of a desperate woman who couldn't handle the pressures of pregnancy and high society. A terrible accident. Really? Vivian, I don't know if I can go through with this, Alexander said, his voice barely audible. She's carrying my child. She's carrying your old life, Vivian snapped. The life you're ready to leave behind. Think about our future. Alex, think about our empire. Think about the child we're going to have together. Isabella watched through the curtain crack as Vivian pulled out what appeared to be a pregnancy test, waving it like a victory flag. The lies just kept coming. Besides, Vivian added, her voice taking on a dangerously sweet tone, you don't really have a choice anymore. Carlos doesn't tolerate weakness or second thoughts. Cross him now, and you'll end up in a shallow grave alongside your precious Isabella. That was when Isabella realized the full scope of Vivian's manipulation. Alexander wasn't just an unfaithful husband, he was a victim too, trapped in a web of blackmail and threats that made escape impossible. It didn't excuse his betrayal, but it explained the haunted look she'd seen in his eyes during those final weeks of their marriage. The sound of the orchestra beginning to play drifted through the mansion, signaling the start of the gala. Vivian checked her appearance in the mirror, smoothing her red silk gown, a gown Isabella recognized as one from her own closet. Showtime, Vivian announced. Remember, you're the devoted husband hosting this charity event in honor of your beloved but absent wife. Tragic, but dignified. Can you manage that? Alexander nodded mutely, and they left the study together, leaving Isabella alone with her racing thoughts and desperate plans. The grand ballroom of the Sterling mansion had been transformed into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across the walls, where priceless artwork hung between cascading arrangements of white orchids. 300 guests mingled beneath soaring ceilings, their conversations creating a sophisticated buzz that spoke of power, wealth, and influence. Isabella watched from the balcony overlooking the ballroom, hidden in the shadows but with a perfect view of the proceedings. Below her, Alexander stood at the podium delivering his opening remarks to the assembled crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight for the Sterling Foundation's annual charity gala. His voice carried clearly through the room's acoustics. This year, we're raising funds for women's shelters across California, a cause very close to my heart and that of my wife, Isabella, who unfortunately couldn't be with us tonight due to her pregnancy. The crowd murmured sympathetically, and Isabella saw Vivian standing at the edge of the dance floor, accepting condolences and well wishes with practiced grace. The performance was flawless, the concerned family friend supporting a devoted husband during his wife's health crisis. Isabella waited until Alexander finished his speech and the evening's entertainment began. A string quartet played Vivaldi while guests sampled champagne and canapes. Their attention focused on the small stage where a renowned soprano began her performance. It was time. Isabella descended the grand staircase slowly, deliberately, each step calculated for maximum dramatic impact. She'd timed her appearance perfectly. The soprano was halfway through her aria. The lights were dimmed for atmosphere, and every eye in the room was focused on the performance. Until they weren't. The first person to notice her was Senator Patricia Hawkins, whose champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the hushed ballroom, and heads began to turn. A wave of recognition rippled through the crowd as more guests spotted the figure descending the staircase. Isabella Sterling, 7 months pregnant and supposedly in Switzerland, walking calmly into her own charity gala, wearing a vintage black dress and an expression of serene determination. The soprano's voice faltered and died as she too noticed the disturbance. The string quartet's music scattered into discordant notes before falling silent entirely. 300 people stood frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing a miraculous return or a vengeful ghost. Alexander's face went white as cemetery marble. Vivian's composure cracked for just an instant, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the flash of pure terror in her eyes. Isabella reached the ballroom floor and walked steadily toward the podium, her heels clicking against marble in the sudden silence. Camera flashes began going off as the news photographers realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. "Good evening," Isabella said, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system as she took the microphone from her husband's nerveless fingers. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but I have something important to share with all of you." 300 of California's most powerful people stared at her in rapt attention. Behind them, she could see the red lights of television cameras, broadcasting live to an audience that was about to witness the destruction of one of the state's most prominent families. "My name is Isabella Sterling," she continued, "and for the past 7 days, I have been held prisoner in the attic of my own home." The ballroom erupted. Voices rose in shock and disbelief. Camera flashes increased to a strobing intensity, and several guests pressed closer to get a better view of the unfolding drama. "That's impossible." Vivian's voice cut through the chaos as she pushed forward through the crowd. "Isabella has been in Switzerland receiving treatment. She's clearly having some kind of breakdown." "Shut up," Isabella said calmly, and something in her tone made the entire room fall silent again. "I have 7 days of imprisonment to discuss, but more importantly, I have evidence of crimes that will shock you all." She pulled the USB drive from her purse and held it up for everyone to see. "This contains financial records proving that Sterling Corporation is a front for money laundering operations. It contains evidence that my husband has been working with the Mendoza cartel to wash drug money through real estate transactions. And it contains proof that Vivian Cross, the woman standing behind him, is a serial killer who has murdered at least 3 wealthy men for their fortunes." The ballroom exploded into chaos. Guests pressed forward, reporters shouted questions, and security guards looked uncertain about whether to intervene. In the midst of it all, Isabella stood calm and still, like the eye of a hurricane. "You're insane," Vivian snarled, abandoning all pretense of sympathy. "Nobody will believe. They'll believe the recordings," Isabella interrupted, pulling out her phone, "including your confession to Carlos Mendoza about planning my murder." She connected the phone to the sound system, and Vivian's voice filled the ballroom with crystal clarity. "Of course. First we need to deal with your dear wife. The poor thing is so unstable, locked away in that attic. Who knows what tragic accident might befall her?" The recording continued, playing out the entire conversation between Vivian, Alexander, and Carlos. With each damning word, Isabella watched the faces in the crowd transform from confusion to horror to righteous anger. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. "Ladies and gentlemen," Isabella said into that silence, "I present to you the true nature of the Sterling Foundation Charity Gala, a front for international criminal activities, hosted by a money launderer and his murderous mistress." That's when she noticed the familiar faces pushing through the crowd. FBI agents led by Marcus Chen, who had apparently been working with federal authorities longer than Isabella had realized. "Alexander Sterling, you're under arrest for money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy," one of the agents announced, producing handcuffs. "Vivian Rodriguez, also known as Vivian Cross, you're under arrest for multiple counts of first-degree murder." As the handcuffs clicked into place, Vivian's composure finally shattered completely. "You bitch!" she screamed at Isabella. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Carlos will kill you for this. He'll hunt you down and—" "Carlos Mendoza was arrested 3 hours ago," Marcus interrupted smoothly, "along with 12 members of his organization. Turns out the FBI has been building a case against his money laundering operations for 2 years. Isabella's evidence was the final piece they needed." Isabella watched as Alexander was led away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling around him like a house of cards. As he passed her, he stopped and looked into her eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, Isabella. I never meant for it to go this far." "I know," she replied, and meant it. "But sorry doesn't undo 7 days in an attic. Sorry doesn't undo the betrayal. And sorry certainly doesn't undo the fact that you stood by while she planned to murder me and our daughter." Alexander's shoulders sagged in defeat as the agents led him away. Vivian was fighting the handcuffs, still screaming threats and denials as she was dragged toward the exit. As she passed Isabella, she spat out her final venomous words. "You think you've won? You think this is over? I'll destroy you. You pathetic." Isabella stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than all of Vivian's screaming. "You already tried to destroy me. Vivian, you locked me in an attic and left me to die. But you made one crucial mistake." "What mistake?" Vivian snarled. Isabella smiled, and it was a smile that made hardened FBI agents take a step back. "You assumed I was just another helpless victim. You forgot that I'm not just a wife or an artist or even just a pregnant woman. I'm a mother protecting her child, and there is nothing, absolutely nothing more dangerous than that." As Vivian was dragged away, still screaming, Isabella turned to face the crowd of stunned guests and news cameras. The ballroom was chaos, reporters shouting questions, guests talking frantically into phones, and somewhere in the background, sirens wailing as more law enforcement arrived. Isabella Sterling stood in the center of it all, 7 months pregnant and victorious, having just brought down a criminal empire and exposed the woman who had tried to destroy her. The evening news would lead with this story for weeks. Social media would explode with hashtags like "Justice for Isabella" and "Pregnant and Powerful." But none of that mattered to Isabella in that moment. What mattered was the gentle flutter in her belly, her daughter, safe and protected, moving with the strength that came from a mother who would never stop fighting for her child. The war was over. Isabella had won. But the real victory wouldn't come until she had built something beautiful from the ashes of her destroyed life. 6 months after the gala that shook California's elite to its core, Isabella Sterling stood in the executive boardroom of what was now called Romano Enterprises, formerly Sterling Corporation. The transformation was as complete as it was symbolic, where once hung portraits of Alexander's business achievements. Now displayed Isabella's paintings, bold, vibrant works that spoke of survival, strength, and rebirth. At her side slept 3-month-old Sophia Marie Sterling in a designer carrier, her tiny fist wrapped around Isabella's finger. The baby was perfect 10 fingers, 10 toes, and the kind of quiet alertness that suggested she would inherit her mother's intelligence and determination. "The quarterly reports are remarkable," said Robert Mitchell, the corporate attorney who had helped Isabella navigate the complex process of claiming control of the company. 6 months ago, Sterling Corporation was facing federal seizure as a criminal enterprise. Today, Romano Enterprises is California's fastest-growing sustainable development company. Isabella smiled, adjusting Sophia's blanket before turning to the wall of windows that overlooked downtown Los Angeles. The view was breathtaking, a sprawling metropolis of possibilities, each building representing dreams, struggles, and triumphs. "It's amazing what happens when you remove corruption from a business model," she replied. "Turns out that legitimate real estate development is actually quite profitable when you're not paying protection money to drug cartels." The transformation hadn't been easy. When the FBI seized Sterling Corporation's assets as part of their investigation, Isabella found herself in the unique position of being both a victim and a potential heir to a criminal empire. The legal battles alone had taken months, but Marcus Chen's evidence and Isabella's own documentation of Alexander's crimes had ultimately proven that she was an innocent party. More than innocent, she was the solution. Working with federal prosecutors and financial investigators, Isabella had helped untangle the web of legitimate and illegitimate businesses that Alexander had woven. For every shell company used to launder money, there was a real development project that employed hundreds of workers. For every fake transaction, there were genuine properties that housed families and businesses. Isabella kept the good and eliminated the bad, transforming a criminal operation into something that could actually help people. The Women's Shelter Project is particularly impressive, continued Rebecca Santos, Romano Enterprises' new chief operating officer, a position Isabella had created specifically for the former federal prosecutor who had helped convict Vivian. 53 safe houses built or renovated in 6 months, each one designed to provide not just shelter, but genuine support for women escaping domestic violence. That's the difference between Alexander's charity work and ours, Isabella said, settling into her chair as Sophia stirred slightly. His foundation was about tax write-offs and good publicity. Ours is about actually solving problems. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The money that had once flowed to criminals now funded programs that helped their victims. The properties that had once hidden illegal activities now provided homes for people who needed fresh starts. Isabella had turned her husband's empire of corruption into a force for genuine good. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. 60 Minutes interview airs tonight. You ready to watch yourself become the most famous woman in America? Isabella smiled. The 60 Minutes profile had been Marcus's idea, a way to tell her story completely and control the narrative that had been swirling through media coverage for months. She'd been reluctant at first, preferring to focus on rebuilding rather than reliving the trauma, but ultimately decided that sharing her experience might help other women in similar situations. The interview had been surprisingly cathartic. Sitting across from Leslie Stahl, holding Sophia in her arms, Isabella had told the complete story: the betrayal, the imprisonment, the evidence gathering, and the dramatic confrontation. But more importantly, she talked about what came after: the choice to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than seek vengeance. The easiest thing would have been to walk away, she'd told the interviewer. Take whatever money I could get from the divorce, disappear, start over somewhere else. But that would have meant letting Alexander and Vivian's victims go uncompensated. It would have meant letting a criminal enterprise continue operating under new management. Instead, Isabella had chosen the harder path: complete reconstruction. A knock on the boardroom door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called, and was surprised to see her assistant escorting an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Sterling, I'm Detective Maria Gonzalez, LAPD. I wonder if I could have a moment of your time? Isabella gestured to a chair, studying the detective's expression. Is this about Alexander or Vivian? I thought both cases were closed. They are, Detective Gonzalez confirmed. Alexander received 25 years federal prison for racketeering and money laundering. Vivian Rodriguez was sentenced to life without parole for 3 counts of first-degree murder, with additional sentences for fraud and conspiracy. Justice has been served, at least in the legal sense. Then what brings you here? Detective Gonzalez pulled out a thick folder. I wanted to thank you personally. Your evidence didn't just solve the Sterling case. It helped us close 12 other investigations spanning 5 states. Vivian's crime spree was much more extensive than we initially realized. Isabella felt a chill as she thought about the other women who had suffered at Vivian's hands, the families destroyed by her greed and manipulation. We identified at least 7 other victims, the detective continued. Women whose deaths were ruled accidental or natural, but which we now know were murders. Because of your courage, their families finally have answers. And more importantly, we prevented future victims. As Detective Gonzalez left, Isabella sat quietly for a moment, processing the magnitude of what her decision to fight back had accomplished. It hadn't just been about her own survival, it had been about stopping a predator who would have continued killing until someone stood up to her. The afternoon brought more visitors, a delegation from the California State Assembly, there to discuss Isabella's proposal for a statewide network of domestic violence resources. As the only person in recent memory to have actually escaped from an abusive situation and then used her resources to help others, Isabella had become an unlikely expert on the topic. The problem isn't just providing shelter, she explained to the assembled politicians. It's providing genuine independence, job training, childcare, legal support, psychological counseling. Women need all of these things to truly escape abusive situations. Senator Patricia Hawkins, who had been at the gala that fateful night, nodded enthusiastically. Your model shelter in Santa Monica is already serving as a template for programs across the country. The federal government is interested in funding similar initiatives nationwide. Isabella felt a surge of pride as she thought about the Santa Monica facility, the first shelter built entirely with Romano Enterprises funding. It didn't just house women escaping abuse. It provided job training, college preparation courses, and even entrepreneurship programs. Several women who had started as residents were now employees, having discovered talents and ambitions they never knew they possessed. As evening approached and the last meeting concluded, Isabella found herself alone in her office with Sophia. The baby was awake now, studying her mother's face with the intense curiosity of the very young. "What do you think, little one?" Isabella asked softly. "Are we making a difference?" Sophia's response was a gurgle that Isabella chose to interpret as approval. The office was quiet now, the bustling energy of the business day replaced by the peaceful solitude of evening. Isabella walked to the window wall, looking out over the city lights that sparkled like earthbound stars. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman transformed by tragedy into something stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. The scared, trapped woman in the attic felt like a different person entirely, though Isabella knew she carried those 7 days with her always, not as trauma, but as a reminder of what she was capable of surviving. Her phone rang, and Alexander's name appeared on the screen. She'd been expecting this call. They spoke once a month now, brief conversations that were part legal necessity and part something else. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a kind of understanding that surprised them both. "Hello, Alexander. Isabella. How is Sophia?" "She's perfect. Growing fast. Very alert. She has your eyes." A pause. "I got the papers you sent. The college fund. The trust." "Isabella, you didn't have to do that." "She's your daughter too," Isabella replied simply. "Whatever happened between us, that doesn't change. I don't deserve your generosity." "No, you don't. But she deserves to have opportunities. And that money was stolen from people who deserve better. Using it to give our daughter a future feels like justice." Another pause, longer this time. "I saw the 60 Minutes interview. You were incredible. I never realized how strong you were." "I never realized it either," Isabella admitted. "Turns out strength isn't something you have. It's something you find when you need it most. I'm proud of what you've built, what you've become. Thank you." And Isabella, "I'm sorry. I know I've said it before, but I need you to know I'm sorry for all of it. The affair, the betrayal, letting Vivian manipulate me into hurting you. I'm sorry I wasn't the man you deserved." Isabella looked at her reflection in the window, then at Sophia sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I know you are, Alexander, and I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine. Carrying anger takes too much energy, and I have better things to do with mine." After they hung up, Isabella remained at the window for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and justice, about the difference between weakness and strength, about the strange paths that led from destruction to creation. Her story had become something of a legend, the pregnant woman who escaped from an attic prison and brought down a criminal empire. Magazine covers, book deals, speaking engagements, and movie options had all followed. But Isabella had turned down most of them, preferring to focus on the work rather than the fame. The work was what mattered. Every woman who found safety in one of Romano Enterprises' shelters, every family housed in their sustainable developments, every former victim who discovered strength and independence that was Isabella's real victory. As she prepared to leave the office, Isabella's phone buzzed with social media notifications. The 60 Minutes interview was airing, and already the responses were pouring in. Isabella's sister strong women inspire strong women. This is what real courage looks like. From victim to victor, Isabella Sterling is a warrior. Watching with my daughters tonight. This is the kind of woman I want them to become. Isabella smiled, turning off her phone. The praise was nice, but it wasn't why she'd shared her story. She'd shared it for the women still trapped in their own attics, literal or metaphorical, who needed to see that escape was possible, that survival was just the beginning, and that from the ashes of destroyed lives, something beautiful could grow. "Come on, little one," she whispered to Sophia as they headed for the elevator. "Let's go home." Home was a penthouse apartment overlooking the Pacific Ocean, decorated with Isabella's paintings and filled with the sounds of a life rebuilt from scratch. It was smaller than the Sterling mansion, simpler, but infinitely more peaceful. Here, there were no secrets, no lies, no shadows hiding predators, just a mother and daughter, building a future together. As Isabella stood on her balcony that night, watching the waves roll endlessly toward shore while Sophia slept safely in her crib, she thought about the women who would watch her interview and see possibilities they'd never imagined. Some would find the courage to leave abusive situations. Others would discover strength they didn't know they possessed. A few might even transform their own tragedies into forces for positive change. That was Isabella's true legacy, not the empire she'd built or the criminals she'd exposed, but the ripple effect of hope spreading outward from her story like waves from a stone dropped in still water. 7 months ago, she'd been a trapped, terrified woman with no options and no hope. Tonight, she was a CEO, a philanthropist, a mother, and a symbol of what was possible when ordinary people found extraordinary courage. The transformation was complete, but the story, the real story of using survival as a foundation for service, was just beginning. And somewhere in the darkness, beyond her balcony, Isabella knew that other women were looking at their own reflections and asking themselves the same question she'd asked in that attic. What am I truly capable of? The answer, Isabella had learned, was always more than they imagined. Always more than anyone imagined. What did you think of Isabella's incredible journey from victim to victor? Could you have survived 7 days locked in an attic while 7 months pregnant? How would you have used the evidence against Alexander and Vivian? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Did Isabella make the right choice in forgiving Alexander? Or should she have been more ruthless in her revenge? If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more incredible stories of courage, revenge, and redemption. Share this video to spread the message that strong women can overcome anything life throws at them. Because sometimes, the greatest victory isn't destroying your enemies, it's becoming someone so successful that their betrayal becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. What should our next story be about? Let us know in the comments what kind of dramatic tale you'd like to hear next.